Anyhow, my name's Kit Galvin, and I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do because it'll probably be something you haven't heard of. I work at the University of Washington in the School of Public Health at the Pacific Northwest Agriculture, Safety, and Health Center. So we work on health and safety issues in agriculture, fishing, and forestry. And that is a sector that in the U.S. and in our region and in our state have very high injury rates, and they don't have high injury rates, and they don't have a lot of, there's not a lot of other research done on it in other places. That's one of the reasons they have these 10 research centers across the U.S. And the next question I'm usually asked is, well, if you're agriculture, why aren't you at WSU? And, right, okay, I figured somebody was thinking that. Well, because we're occupational health, we're in the School of Public Health. That's where it usually falls. But what we do is we partner with WSU. Susan Kerr is here. She was a partner on this project. So we have both the agriculture side and the health and safety side. And if I get too far off, if you get too much into cows, she'll answer my questions for me. I'm working on the occupational side. She might be able to help out. So, and I was also asked what I do. I'm a research scientist, but I'm also something called a professional industrial hygienist, or CIH. I'm certified, which means I've been trained in the anticipation, recognition, evaluation, and control of workplace health hazards and safety hazards. So we aren't just as inspectors by any means. A lot work for companies. I work in research. We do a lot of different things. So that gives you a little bit of idea. Any questions about this? Because kind of new to some of you, probably. Okay. Oh, and this is a small group. We can stop at any time. Ask questions, please. If you don't understand something or you think something's wrong, I want to know. And you're the first ones to see this stuff. So I'm going to give you a little more background on the project, talk about our methods, what we found, our conclusions, and our recommendations. Pretty standard thought fair. So background. As I mentioned, we also call ourselves Panache. It's the abbreviation. We like Panache better than PNASH or something else. Panache. But anyway, on this project from WSU Extension, we collaborated with Susan Kerr, and who you know, and she's in this room, right? And Holly Ferguson, who's an entomologist, and Douglas Walsh, who's an entomologist, and they're on the other side of the mountains. The overall project that I'm going to talk about, I'm talking about a piece of an overall project. The overall project was using integrated pest management to reduce pyrethroid pesticide exposures in dairy workers, but we found that exposures weren't necessarily all that high, so we are now focusing on, we've decided to shift the focus more towards there's other reasons for reducing pesticide use, including resistance, insect resistance to the pesticides, and it's good practice to minimize exposure, but up front, we didn't find really high exposures. And our principal investigator is Mike Yost. He's the chair of our department too, and we collaborated on this part with the Washington State Department of Health, who did our sample analysis in the beginning of the study, not the part I'm going to talk about. So I would really like to thank, I put these up front instead of at the end, our 6 cooperating dairies. They're owner-operators, managers, or employees that worked with us. And our field team, who was Maria Chung, Jose Camona, Brenda Solis, Sarah Amar, and Jessica Martinez, and the Center for Disease Control, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which is our funding agency. And if I've forgotten anybody, I apologize. And thank you for having me here today, too. So the goals of the project were to estimate the current pesticide use alternatives. And I have a copy of the results of that study. It was done about almost 4.5 years ago. I don't know if anybody remembered getting a survey in the mail, and it was 4.5 years, a long time ago, and a lot of them went in the circular file, I know, or the shredder, or got recycled, hopefully. But that I'm not going to talk about today, but it was just what was the current status of pesticide use and other pest management strategies, or IPM strategies. So in this study, we focused more on introducing existing pest control strategies to improve fly management. So taking something that already existed but was not being used in different dairies to see if it improved the fly management, and then evaluate the effectiveness of it, and then assess. We still had to keep in this assess the potential for pyrethroid exposures. These are the flies that are often found or most often found in Washington dairy farms. These look familiar to you, especially the stable and the housefly. Seen them around. We did not, in our study, because we were working in dairy barns and milking parlors and calf areas, we did not come across the face fly and the horn fly. So we were just we just looked at, well, we looked for those, but we never found them, or we found very few. And so we focused on stable and house flies. And, yeah, that told us that. So a little bit about the stable fly. Are people familiar with these bugs, with these flies at all? Okay. The stable fly, its life cycle occurs between April and October. You know that, that's when you get flies. The adult females lay eggs on decaying vegetation, manure, soil bedding, decaying feed, and then the larvae grow and pupate into mature manure and bedding. You're pretty familiar with this probably. And the significance of this pest is that it is a blood-sucking, so it actually bites people and animals, and it's no fun, and it aggravates the cows. And it aggravates the people too. In a recent study, they thought the cattle industry, the economic impact in the cattle industry of the stable fly was approximately $2.2 billion, and in the confined dairy industry, it was about $360 million US. So it does have an impact and a financial impact, though on an individual farm basis, it might not be as big, but overall, it's big. And this is the housefly, one we're quite familiar with. We actually looked at, we didn't take it down to species, we used the musca, or the genus, because they show up and they're kind of hard to tell apart anyway, they're all there. It has the same life cycle as the stable fly, and it loves bedding and decaying feed and garbage. And the larvae grow and pupate again in the bedding and the manure. And it's essentially an indirect pest where it's annoying, and it annoys cows, as I think you well know. And agitated cows aren't happy cows. And they're known to transfer disease pathogens, but the way they do it is just a mechanical transfer. So they'll land on it, and then it'll get whatever the pathogen is on their feet. I'm not sure if you call that a feet, but it'll get on their body parts, and then they'll land someplace else and can transfer the pathogen. They don't have to ingest it or anything. It's just a mechanical transfer, or biting. So, categories the current fly management strategies using an overall approach. Environmental control or general housekeeping, which I'm sure you're familiar with, manure management, sanitation, cleaning feed alleys, chemical control for adult flies by insecticide sprays or pour-ons to cows. Larvae is using feed-through fly control, which is it's mixed in with the feed or the milk, and then the larvae, when they start developing in the manure or the bedding, are killed by the pesticide that comes through, and this is all approved by FDA. You can use them with cattle and calves and cows. Then there are physical methods like screening, ventilation, fans, traps, sticky traps to catch them, and then some people use parasitic wasps. So here, how many people here are associated with conventional dairies? Just so I have an idea. Anybody organic? None of the above? No dairy?
Conventional, yeah.
Conventional? Yeah, okay. Anybody do almost organic, but they want to treat their cows? That's another one where they want to treat their cows for medical conditions, but otherwise are organic, or they're really low on using the pesticides? No? Okay. We've come across a variety of things. So when you put these all together, you come down to what we call integrated pest management. Now that's a familiar term or not? Is this familiar to people? Okay, good. So I don't have to explain it. So, yes? You can share it. Okay, so.
Were these studies conducted in western, eastern, or both sides of the mountains?
We'll get to that, but the study was in both sides of the mountains.
Okay.
Yeah, we did not just do it up here. We also were in eastern Washington as well. So, so one of the things in the background is that the really main source is in calf bedding. Studies have shown that these flies really like calf bedding. They like the mixture of urine, manure, spilled milk, rainwater. It's just this lovely organic soup of stuff that the flies really like to feed on and lay their eggs in. And so it's the ideal environment for both houseflies and stable flies. So has anybody used the feed-through product here? You have, okay. So there's an adult product, the Clarify, which is mixed. If you have your feed mixed at the mill, it's all mixed in. You don't even have to think about it. If you use the Elimify, that has to be mixed in with the calf's milk, and that's for baby calves. And in between, it gets a little bit more, not as straightforward. We worked out a rough cost, because we paid for it in the studies, and it was costing us about 6 cents an adult cow per day for the Clarify, and for the calves it was about 2.5 cents a day. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the cost. And we saw a whole variety of pyrethroid products, primarily ones that contain permethrin, and there was Brute and Ultraboss and Gold, I can't read it, Gold, and Silence. Silence actually uses a different active ingredient than the other three, but permethrin is the main active ingredient, and it is the chemical form of a pyrethrin, which is what you get from chrysanthemum, the natural one that has a very short action period. It only lasts for a very short period of time. And permethrin is the chemical equivalent that's been developed to last longer. And so we can see here, now I have an exit gold synergized. So this is just the main products that we saw when we were doing the study. This is not all of them, but the main ones that were the pour-on ones, and or spray on cows directly, and what their active ingredients are and their percent ingredients. This can stay in. So for our method. Now, that was the background. Any questions, thoughts, think people want to say? Yeah.
Yeah, the one first product, what is the active ingredient?
It's, do you mean for the feed-through? They're both difluorobenzene. They're both the same active ingredient for the feed-throughs. Yeah, it's diflobenzuron, sorry. Diflobenzuron.
So that can be fed to cows then too?
It's approved for cows. And
what's the mode of action?
It acts on the larvae, so I can't tell you exactly how it acts on the larvae. The entomologist isn't here, but we can find out and get the information to you. But one of its benefits is, and I'm glad you brought it up because I missed that, is it acts on the larvae, so they never turn into flies.
So it goes into the manure?
It goes into the manure, and then they act there on the larvae after the eggs are laid. They never become adults. And that's one of the advantages of it, because any of the pyrethroids you use act on the adults. That was one of my main points, and I really thank you for asking.
All right.
So, yeah, so you never get the adult fly.
And it doesn't, that's why it doesn't go into the milk either, apparently. That's what it is.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to go into the milk. It's approved for it. It's passed. We wouldn't have been doing, nobody would have let us do it, nor would we have even thought of doing it if it wasn't approved for this. But, yeah.
Does
But,
it kill the larvae?
what?
Does it eventually kill
Yeah,
the
it kills the larvae. They never develop. It kills them. So they never become flies. Full-grown flies.
So they end up dying.
Yeah, they're dead. Yep, they end up dying. We'll get down to it. They're dead. Okay. Yeah, it kills them. So anyhow,
Would it be prohibited from an organic farmer using
yes,
separated solids from the dairy that was using this product?
from the separated solids, I don't believe organic dairies can use it because it does.
Not organic dairy, but say I was a vegetable grower and I grow my crop organically, but I get my nutrients, my manure from a dairyman. Would I be prohibited from using?
I don't know how fast it decays, and you'd have to find out whether it's in what you get, the manure you get. There's also could be other pesticides in the manure as well if you're getting them from a conventional dairy farmer.
All livestock manure is considered organic for the organic system or National Organic Program, but as you mentioned, there certainly can be some problematic chemicals in there, horse manure, and if there's an ivermectin or something, that certainly can feel beneficial about the environment for a
Yeah.
while, but it is an approved organic amendment.
So even if the limifly or if the difluorbenzoron was in it, they do break down. These pesticides do break down over time, and I assume when you're composting your manure and stuff, it'll break down too. That's a part of the process.
And both of these products will kill the stable fly
And the housefly, yes.
I got a
Larvae.
question on that stable fly. You said it's a biting, it bites?
It bites.
It's like blood?
Mhm.
Can it be a source of transmission for BOV in cattle?
Okay, can somebody help me with this one?
I think it can.
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Biting insects, yes.
Because it bites and some of the blood goes back down, or it bites another one?
Anything that can transmit white blood cells from a positive animal to another animal can do it. So biting insects are probably a minor but possible route.
Thank you. I knew there was a reason we were here to do this, Susan.
Were the pyrethrins, were some of them natural or were they all synthetic pyrethrins?
We used these studies were in conventional dairies, and they used the synthetic pyrethroids. The pyrethrins were not part of the study because people weren't using them. And also it's a whole different analytical method for when we took our samples back to the lab. And people weren't using them. And the pyrethrins, the non-synthetic ones don't persist very long, whereas the pyrethroids, like Permethrin and the other, like the products we studied in here, those persist longer. So,
Like more than a day or something?
yes.
Okay.
Does it matter what kind of carrier those products were in, like oil-based compared to the, I want to say that cellulose or whatever?
We didn't study the carrier for, are you talking about the feed-through or the
No,
Yeah. the pesticides? Let's get on the pesticide page then.
Yeah,
We did not look at what the carrier was. What we studied was what the dairy operator was using. So we didn't give them the pesticide to use. They used what they normally used in their daily operation. Okay, so we only know, that's why the products we have. I mean, you can go and buy them off the shelf, and most people used ones with permethrin in them, and some used the cyfluthrin. Or they used a combination. Okay, we've seen this one. So I'll tell you a little bit about the study design. Then we monitored for pest pressure, which is the flies, how many flies were flying around. And then we monitored also for different fly control methods people were using. I'll tell you about that. And then we did look at pesticide residues on inert surfaces. So we did this over 2 years, 2014 and 2015 during fly season. 5 of the dairies used feed-through, 1 did not. 5 housed calves, 1 didn't. And they were located both in eastern and western Washington. So then we monitored weekly for both the pest pressure and the fly control methods. The pyrethroid study we did, each dairy had 1 surface residue study where we sampled before it was applied, after it was applied, and then a month later without any other application in the middle. to see if it was still persisting after a month. And then the last study we did was with one pesticide, Permethrin, which was like in brute. And we did one study to see how it decayed. You were asking me how long it persisted, and the study was to look at how long it persisted. And so I'll tell you about that. So, people familiar with sticky cards? This is what we trapped our flies on. In each dairy, we picked 3 to 4 areas, and then we did 3 cards in each area and averaged the number. It's a fly counts are pretty variable, but it gives us, if you look at trends, that's more important than looking what you got in one day in one location. We counted for stable and house flies, and then we did it weekly. And then fly control measures. We did an interview weekly with either the operator or manager or someone who was designated for us, our field team, to talk to about what they had been doing in terms of fly control methods, anything changes they observed in fly populations or cow behavior, gaff behavior, and we made observations at the time we were there. And so, of course, we looked at all the different kinds of methods, including environmental, physical, chemical, and biological. Only one place used wasps in this study, and we really weren't studying the wasps, but they used them. And then we also asked them if they had any changes in animal management, if they'd moved the calves out of the hutches and put new calves in, things like that. Anything that could influence the pest pressure we asked about. And this is for pesticide residues. I don't have a picture, but we use take a standard area and we wipe it with a standard size cotton cloth, and it's kind of like a gauze bandage. And then we analyzed for a variety of pyrethroids that show up that we analyzed for. And then the Permethrin decay study, you can see in here 4 trays, and they all have these little silvery looking dots. This is an inert metal. It's like a Avery dot, only it's inert metal, it's sticky, it sticks down. And those were covered with Permethrin, I think it was fruit. And then we randomly selected 4 at 2, 4, 24, 72, 168, 36, 336, and 504 hours, roughly 3 weeks, and had them analyzed for the concentration, or how much was on that dot and averaged it. So this is where we're going to look at the decay to see if there's still, after 504 hours, sorry, that's how they designed the study, is to do it by hours. So to see what the, how much was left. And you can see here where some have already been removed. Those are probably our baseline ones we did before the spray was applied. So now I'm going to talk about results, both from the pest pressure and fly control measures, and then the pyrethroid use. Do people understand when I say pyrethroid? It's like a category of pesticides, which includes permethrin, cyclothrin. So I'm talking about it as a category. Okay. So we're going to go through 4 of the dairies. I decided you probably didn't want to look at lots and lots of graphs. They can get a little boring. But let me orient you to this on the upper left. Oh, I guess I do have a pointer.
There's a switch on the side.
Yep. Okay. Oh, I just had
And
to
the
point.
top one.
Yeah, there we go. So this is the dairy. Always the top one is the housefly results, and the bottom one is the stable fly results. This is the mean count of stable flies count per card. They all were the same size card. And we collected cards once a week, and then we put out new cards each week. And then you can see that in dairy 1, we had cards up for adult cows in a grain area, calf hutches, manure pit area, and the milking parlor chute. It was right after they left, the cows left the milking parlor. And sometimes these vary a little bit. We look for places that would have flies, and then we often look for one place that didn't have as many flies. In this case, in this dairy, they didn't have much problem all year with houseflies. These arrows here are when they did apply a pyrethroid pesticide. They also did one at the very beginning of the season and one at the very end after we left. So everybody went back to school. Yeah?
I guess what part of your study was to look at the health effect, the potential effects on humans.
Right.
So what, I mean, is there some reason?
Why
We're
we,
looking at efficacy here, material.
you're getting mostly the efficacy stuff because when we did initial studies, which I'm not presenting now, we did not find high enough levels and we did not find health effects in humans, to be honest.
That's why they're using these materials. That's why pyrethroids are considered to be very safe.
Yeah.
Use them in grocery stores.
I know, and you can pick them up. The other thing is, well, but if people get too much or they're misusing it, and I will tell you, we did find someone who was misusing it and caught something, which I'll talk about in a little bit, if people misuse it. But the variability, and this was, we set up the study with the Department of Health when we didn't know anything yet about what was in, we write our grant, we get funded a year later, and we're at the end of the 5 years now. So 6 years ago, we were proposing to find some things out. And one of the things was that in the general population, the amount of metabolites that come out in the urine is highly variable, and is highly variable by occupational group. They actually looked at another group that used far more pyrethroids, and you couldn't tell them apart from the general population. We all, unless we are on a really, really strict organic diet, we all have metabolites in our urine at different levels. It depends on what we eat the day before or the 2 days before that.
And it's one of the most commonly used materials in organic agriculture, and that's one of the problems.
Well, the pyrethrins are used.
Well, the pyrethrins.
They're very different, actually. Pyrethrins can be used in organic and pyrethroids can't.
Well, right, the artificial ones can't.
Yeah, so, and the pyrethrins are considered even less toxic than the pyrethroids. There's other reasons to look at them too. One is what we call general, a precautionary principle is, you know how sometimes a pesticide everybody thought was fine and then after a while they decide, nah, it's not fine? Well, as far as we know, this one is fine. But what is going on now, so that if something comes down the line, we're scientists, we tend to look at things a little bit differently than somebody who's producing milk for the population. So that's one of the reasons for looking at it, but our results were that they weren't as much as a problem. Also, people can get residues on them, and it's just being general sanitation and housekeeping is a good idea. And there are a couple of other things we found happening that would be good for dairies just to know about, might be going on in their dairy and they weren't aware of in terms of the use of the pesticide. So does that answer your question? Yeah, I know. I shifted from looking at pesticides to pest control, but that's okay. So now this, oops, I managed to turn it off. Oh, good. I got this remote now. Everyone's different. So, but when we looked in this other, at the stable flies, there we go. You can see that they had a little bit higher levels throughout the season. The pesticide applications may not have had particular impact on them. We don't know why. And then this is the milking parlor chute went up, the manure pit went up in September, and we really haven't figured out why that happened. But we do know, as you'll see, let me go to the next one. This is dairy 2, and I left the 2 off of it. Let's talk about dairy 2 a little bit. I'll talk about what happens in September in a minute. There's a lot that goes on. So in dairy 2, we had the indoor calves, and they just didn't, they had a lot of problems with houseflies, and they couldn't seem to get rid of the housefly problem, even though they were doing everything they thought they could do. However, one of the things about the area when we looked, because we did observations, was They were a little bit older, they weren't in hutches, and they were in a small, low-ceiling barn that didn't have a lot of, well, it had no mechanical ventilation, and it didn't have a lot of natural ventilation, and it was still using bedding. And remember, bedding's one of the real one of the places that these flies like to lay their eggs and like to live. It's their favorite environment. So our recommendations back to this area will be to look at how they're housing their indoor calves. If the flies are a problem, looking at ways to increase their ventilation or house them somewhere else. And then the stable flies weren't too bad the whole time. I'm not sure whether the pesticide applications did a whole lot, but you'll notice this uptick in September. And as we go through, watch most of the slides, there seems to be, even though they're continuing with all their same practices, there seems to be this uptick in September that, I don't know, have people experienced that in September, the flies get worse? Am I seeing any up and downs like this? No, you haven't. What?
I think they.
Yeah, this is a common experience, and we've noticed this. And now it's your personal experience, which is the most important, gets validated by Whatcom cards. How's that? Anyway. So then, dairy 3 really didn't have a problem throughout the season. A little bit of an uptick in the end of the year, and same with their stable flies. They had a bit of an uptick at the end of the season. And then we have dairy 4. Dairy 4 is interesting. The scale on the left is a little bit different. This is 50 instead of 60. And this thing called calf tarp, and this was the calf barn. They tended to have more house flies. The calf tarp was a small barn that could be dismantled and moved, and it had plastic tarping for the walls and the ceiling. The stable flies, this is 250, not 50. Okay, and our poor staff counting flies off those cars were pretty challenging to find 250 flies. And they had a real problem in the beginning of the year, of the season, and then there's this precipitous drop. And two things happened. One was the tarp, the temporary shelter was moved, the temporary barn was moved, the bedding was cleaned out, and they also started using the Clarify daily. They apparently hadn't been using it daily up to then, and then they started using it daily. So we can't really separate out whether it was just the bedding or whether it was the Clarify, but between the two of them, they dropped down pretty well. So that's
The Clarify daily, I thought it was in the grain.
Oh, for calves, it's in the milk.
Oh,
Okay.
You feed it milk or in the grain?
Or you can put it, and the adults would put it in the grain. And if they were in between if they were eating both grain and milk, it was in the grain, but these were calves that were getting milk. So you put it in the milk as long as they're getting milk. Does that make sense?
Or you could put it in the grain,
Right, well,
but not both.
yeah, not both. You would be mixing up the doses. The adults get it mixed in with their feed. If you get it from the mill and mix it in, you don't have a thing to do it. But if you put it in the milk, you have to, and you shouldn't do both. I don't know, I can't guarantee what people did and whether they took some grain that was for their adult cows and gave it to the calves. I don't know. I know it's supposed to be different mixtures in their grain at different stages of their development. I can't guarantee somebody didn't do that, but you put it in the milk for calves until they stop.
I thought they put it in the grain for calves.
Milk.
I think the mill puts it in.
Well, you can ask for that. I'm sure the mill could do that for you. Yeah, they do it for you. Great. We didn't do it for us because some of them were pretty young baby calves, and all of these calves were under 6 months, so they were because then all the calves were under 6 months. We know that for this study. It's the way it was. They then had their calves shipped off elsewhere for maturing, so they didn't keep older calves. So Again, this dairy did not use, they did not use any pesticide application until the very end of September, again, right after we stopped, the week after we stopped. And it was because it was bothering the adult cows somewhat. They had very good manure control and very good ventilation in their barns. And their manure was removed several times a day. So, any questions about these things? Any more questions?
That September event, all went up on, for pretty much every farm.
Yeah, it goes.
Is it somehow weather related, humidity in the morning, whatever?
There is something when I talked to the animalologist on the study, who this was her area of specialty, was working in different types of integrated pest management control for flies. She hadn't figured it out, but she's done other studies where this same phenomenon happens. It comes up in September, and they haven't figured out why, unless she's told you something. Susan, no. It's not something that's been figured out, but it does happen. And one of the things that, one of the recommendations coming out of it is to prepare for that. So as you start to see it, don't wait till it gets too bad. As you start to see it go up, maybe you want to apply pesticides on your cows before it starts to really drive them nuts. I don't know how long it goes. School started, and so our field crew had to go back to school. But of course, when it cools down, then the flies, you have less of a fly problem. So, but we really don't know why, but it happens. And if it happens in your dairy, it happens in everybody else's dairy too, just about. And if somebody has a solution or for having it not occur, or has an idea about why it might be happening then, I'd be happy to hear about it. And I'll put some of my cards on the table. Anything else about pest pressures? Okay. Next one. So one of the things, a couple of things that we learned from interviewing people on a weekly basis and at the beginning and the end was that in these dairies here, these dates are close. They normally applied about once every, in the past they applied every 30 days. It was just a routine thing to do, more routine. But they found that the time, they could wait longer between times that they applied some Poron to the cows when they had the when they were using the feed through. Realize we don't have controls. Maybe it was a lighter year. We do have to acknowledge that. The other thing, they felt that they likely used one less application that year because they were using the feed through. So what we found out, and to summarize the fly pressures, there was longer times between applications. We also, I forgot to mention, I didn't mention earlier, but from our interviews and our observations, that there was one, it was actually Dairy 1, which had a huge, huge fly problem in previous years. And when they used the feed through, it dropped off completely. And if you go back, in Dairy 1, it was completely straight lined, flat lined. And this was in a calf hutch area. They had probably, I don't know what you consider huge, but to me it was a large number, roughly 100 hutches. And it was near a house, so it was a real problem. And they didn't have a problem particularly this past year. So, again, our problem areas showed up in calf housing, where we either had minimal bedding changes were not occurring as frequently as manure removal, and we saw problems when there was poor natural ventilation, and there was no mechanical ventilation. And the other thing we saw this September, this trend in fly pressure, which we really haven't been able to explain, and our entomologist has observed too and can't explain. Let's move on. No.
So that September thing happened even in the farms that they apparently were feeding them the feed through and
Yeah.
the Poron all the same.
Yeah, if you want to go back and look at the September, you want to go back and just kind of look at September for some of these dairies, just to see.
Well, were some of them using feed through and
All of these
Poron at the same time?
It depended on the dairy. This dairy only used feed through.
At what time? At what point?
Oh, use feed through throughout the, feed through starts at before the flies come, and you use it all season long. You need to use it all season long.
And that one started?
It started in June, and they used it through September. They actually started before June 24th. We just didn't have our fly cards out. And so you use it all season. Otherwise, some fly comes along, lays an egg, you know, the manure is fresh, there's no larvicide in it. And so it'll hatch into a fly, so you have to use it all season long. In this dairy, they did use they did a pesticide application. These 3 dairies, 1, 2, and 3, did pesticide applications. Oop, wrong key. Sorry. Dairy 1, they did pesticide applications where you see the arrows. They did one before, we were there, one here, and then one after. And these are the ones that they felt they used less, probably one less application, and they were more spread out, the applications. But they were using it the feed through all the way through.
And they didn't use Clarify?
They used both, the feed through, in both for the Clarify for calves and the, oh gosh, if I get it backwards, adults first, Limify for, yeah, they use the difluoromazone for, all of these dairies used it all season long. We paid for it, we got the bills. Except for the one dairy that didn't use the calf feed through part of the time. Remember that one I showed you where they changed it? So this one didn't see very much of a September uptick. In houseflies, though, there was some in stable flies in some areas. And this one, not so much in houseflies, but definitely in stable flies. And
So is the boron having any effect?
that's a good question.
Feed-through?
Is the boron having an effect?
Is it?
Yeah, I think that's good to ask, because when we look at it, it doesn't seem like you have a drop. When you pour it on, you don't really seem to get much of a drop in pest pressure. Less fly.
It's the feed-through that's doing it.
But maybe the feed through that's doing it. I'm not going to swear that it's the feed through that's doing it, because this is the first time somebody's done a study like this, but I think it is a good, one of the things in your IPM program that you can consider using, and it may help you along with everything else that you're doing. I think the manure removal and the bedding changing and the ventilation are also really important. And which is more important, I'm not sure, but in general, there was good control overall, and the porons didn't seem to have a big effect in terms of where our fly cards were placed, which was in the areas, as long as they had to be high enough up they couldn't be chewed. I think I'm taking a fair amount of time here, okay? Yeah, I better move on. I better finish up here. Sorry about that, Susan. I thought this was going to take me a half an hour. So, but I'm glad you're asking a lot of questions. That's great. Okay, we saw that. So from our pyrethroid studies, overall, we found low levels on railings and other inert surfaces. The highest levels were right after application. That's kind of a no-brainer. The half-life, when we did the decay study, was about 21 days. So a half-life is if you put out 5 grams, 21 days later, there'd be 2.5 grams. So it does persist, which is a good thing if you're concerned about fly control, because they can still, if a fly lands on the surface, they could still come in contact with it, ingest it. Maybe, maybe not. We tested inert surfaces. We did not test manure, I'll have to say, or anything soft, and where they like to land, because that's a little trickier to touch. It's a study, but it's good to know. The other two things we found, which are important, is that pyrethroid showed up in surface samples that were not reported when we were interviewed. So in some places, somebody was going out and buying stuff. You can buy it off the shelf and using it, okay? Somebody in the operation was doing this. And the other thing we found was pyrethroid use occurred in areas not reported and in areas where it should not have been used. And I think the situation was that someone said, hey, I got a fly problem over here in my milking parlor, and you have this leftover pesticide that you've been spraying around the perimeter of the calf hutches. Could I use a little of that to help me? Because my cows are really kicking in the milking parlor. And so anyway, it's really important. You guys are really lucky in many ways. You do not have to follow the EPA worker protection standard for using pesticides. EPA doesn't touch anybody who has cattle or cows. They only touch people with plants. So you don't have to follow the rules, but there are some things from that that are good, like keeping track of the pesticides you're using and where they're being used. I'm not saying anybody here had anything wrong at their dairies, but we did come across this. Anyway, see, I'm getting to conclusions. The use of feed-through reduced the frequency of pesticide use. We felt that occurred. The feed-through, along with IPM strategies, especially the manure embedding removal department, is effective. And permethrin, that was the persistent study we did. It did last, the half-life was 21 days, so it does hang around. How much good it does is another question. Let's see, I think I ended up with 2 conclusions. Oh, recommendations, here we go. So removal of fly habitat more frequently. The one dairy that did not use pyrethroids the whole season removed manure several times a day. So they really didn't have any hanging around. And also because calf bedding is the main place that the most desirable environment, it's really good to consider more frequent calf bedding changes, especially not just when you move the calf out, but in between. That is also very helpful. Increasing ventilations, and then we say consider feed through as part of your IPM program. And then this is where I come back to this, keeping track of your pesticides and uses, they're not on the label. This is where I get my industrial hygiene part in. And know where they're being used. Just a little record keeping. You don't have to fill out all those forms that are on the Washington State Department of Ag's website at all. But do know where they're being used and how much is being used and where. The other thing is that pesticides pests can develop resistance, and there is some shown to pyrethroids. So it's good to use one kind at a time, not mix them all together. We've seen where people were using whatever they had, and they had a variety of things going on, and there's a little of this pesticide and a little of that. It doesn't have to be the same brand, it just has to be the same active ingredient. And then stop using it, and then maybe use something else. But not mix it up, and provide employees training in safe handling and sanitation, hand washing, decontamination if they're going to use gloves. This is pretty standard stuff. And that you do, even though, oops, I keep getting this thing wrong. Okay, there we go. There is a regulation that you do need to follow regarding chemicals, and that is the state hazard communication standard. So I was just giving you a heads up that it exists, and if you don't know about it, but it is not an EPA regulation, it's an OSHA regulation. So,
Hi, my name is Susan Kerr. I'm located at the Mount Vernon Research Center, the station down in Mount Vernon. I'm the Northwest Regional Livestock and Dairy Extension Specialist. And when I first came here, my needs analysis process from producers, one of the big things people wanted some help with was more forage options for the area, especially for dairy cattle, because there are so many challenges making forage here. So we've done a very initial Birdsfoot trial at the Mount Vernon station, and that's the thing I want to share with you here today. And Chuck has some additional information to add today, which is great. Why Birdsfoot? A real plus is that, of course, it's a legume, oh well, and non-bloating, which is a real advantage over alfalfa. And it's believed to have condensed tannins, which are natural internal parasite control chemicals. And that's especially being looked at for small ruminants right now. But I don't know why that wouldn't be the case in large ruminants as well. And as I mentioned, people wanted more forage options for the area. This is what we did. I don't know why, but we had Birdsfoot Trefoil seed at the experiment station, and it was variety not specified. And we planted it mid-September of 2004, at about double the seeding rate because it was older seed, not old, but older. And just you barely dusted in. And we did a pre-planting fertilizer based on our known soil analysis there. And you have to use a specific inoculum for this, not the alfalfa one, but a Birdsfoot Trefoil inoculum.
How did you seed it?
Uh,
Was it air seeded or just regular?
direct seed. We didn't drill, but it wasn't air seeded. No. And so we planted in September. Here's what it looked like in January. You remember that first slide said tolerates wet soil? Well, let's hope. This is actually, I'm describing the results of part of a trial. This is about, I can't remember how big this field is, maybe an acre. But a third was only Timothy, a third was Timothy, Birdsfoot, and the last third was just Birdsfoot. Here's the just Birdsfoot. And we said, well, there goes that. We'll have to figure out something for later. But as we walked around and looked around, not there, we said, this is and we have tremendous annual ryegrass weed pressure at the station. And it does very well. So here was the area that had Timothy and Birdsfoot Trefoil and annual ryegrass. And it was there, even though the other area is very flooded and these are still very wet soils, it was emerging. So we had some hope. I really, though, did think that flooded area was not going to come up. Here's still early January, wet, not that cold. Soils were cold, of course, but not that cold. But we had plenty of emergence. You can see the rows, and I was surprised, really surprised. Still that same January date. Plants are really small. They were probably about 2 inches at most, but they made it through the winter, and they came up. And there's just more January. I'm going to whiz through here. Here's the half and half Birdsfoot and Timothy, and here's just the Birdsfoot. All the grass you see there is annual ryegrass. And remember that line. We're going to see that line again later. That's April of last year. And you're seeing just spots here and there coming up. It's still April. It's all the same date until I put a new date up there. Here, this is the 100% Birdsfoot plot with our friend annual ryegrass. And here's May 11th, the 100% Birdsfoot plot. Plants are growing, really taking off, growing nicely. And here's where I needed this stick because I had it faced wrong, obviously. Came up to about there. Oh no, it is right, it's just so tall. So that's 18 inches at the height there. And it was going gangbusters. And we ended up, we mowed it with a bat wing mower, which was not great because it mashes down a lot of the forage, and we didn't have a way to bale it, or we just left it on the field, and that caused its own problems. But we got 6 cuttings off. We did 5 cuttings ourselves, and then we had someone come in and remove the last, which really helped the plants. We got 6 cuttings, or 6 mowings anyways.
So in each cutting, you just left the grass?
We left it there. Part of this was kind of wasteland that we wanted to improve, and one of the, I was given this land to do what I wanted with until we can improve drainage and improve the nutrient content of the soil. So we're kind of doing a green manure here for a couple years. And
so you had no idea this wasn't harvested as feed,
right.
You don't know what the animals actually would do with it.
Oh, I did take gave some to cattle, and they just ate it like candy. We tried it fresh with a couple animals, but nothing on site. We cut it and fed it immediately to some animals that had a great time. And here's some of the Timothy. And the 100% Timothy plot was for a grazing demo where we mowed one at 3 inches every month, one at 6 inches, and one at 12 inches. And that really had some interesting findings. But the main way we tried to control the annual ryegrass was through this mowing. But it's awful, as you can see. And I just have to remember this. This is the variety not specified plot that we did in August. So that's the second, okay, that's the second sampling. And dry matter basis, we've got 18% crude protein, really good digestibility and intake estimates, good energy, and using mature alfalfa is 100%. It's got really good feed value there, and pleasantly happy with those results, put it that way. And there's just the mineral content there. Whiz along here. And then here's, I think, the thing that's really impressive. We did 2 forage production measurements. One was in July, but it was 2 months. We mowed this every month, and 1 month I asked the field worker to leave this section and not mow it, and then I did a collection that was 2 months old in that little spot that he left. And it ended up being, I worked with Steve Franson to get the results here. I can go through that with anybody that's interested. We ended up for 2 months that it was 9.5 tons per acre for a 2-month growth period using a meter square sample. And then another one I did later was 5 weeks of growth. That was 4.1 tons per acre. And the water difference, there's a lot more water in this because it's less mature than the sample I took that was 2 months old. We had 2 donors of seed and had no problem getting seed from them. So I think this is getting a little more easier to get. We've got varieties of, we're doing a variety planting now. Pardee and Wit came from Allied Seed, and Norsen and the Inoculant came from Stock Seed Farms. Both were very easy to work with. And this is just soil analysis of the seeds where the variety trials went. We'll skip that. Here is this February. Remember that place that was underwater last year? It was underwater again, but you gotta go ahead, it's fine. That's all right. But not, this is February, about a month later of this year. I don't think it flooded as badly, but you'll see later, this is the line, the dashed line that I mentioned between the treatments. Something was applied here that we can't figure it out. It was a grass herbicide of some sort, because the only greenery is the little bit of either clover or birdsfoot that's here. And that effect is still going on. It's very, very strange.
What do you mean something was applied?
We don't know. Well, you'll see it. I'll get a better slide in a minute.
This is an experiment station.
I know it. I know it. No one knows what happened there. It's a giant puzzle. You'll see a better slide here in a minute. All we've got this year, remember, it was all that tremendous amount of annual ryegrass. It's all dead. The only things growing are broadleaf weeds and clover and the birdsfoot. And lots of bare spaces. It's very strange. This is February. They did make it through. They're just emerging, and not as vigorous as I would have liked to have seen, but the soil was cold and wet. You can definitely see the planting furrows, but this is heavy clay soil, very heavy, very wet. And here's the variety trial, which is in a whole different spot. And we've got 3 reps of the 3 different varieties bordered by this variety non-specified birdsfoot. And here's March coming up nicely, and boy, is this a weedy plot. It's just awful. Awful, awful, awful. But the birdsfoot is, you can see it, the especially green spots. It's coming, but awful weed pressure. And again, furrows, furrows, furrows. Still March. And this is the birdsfoot and Timothy plot, which is next to the plot that was that had the grass kill in the birdsfoot, just trotting out a little bit. This is much more vigorous. There's something about the grass being there and the Timothy birdsfoot and the grass being there. I don't know how they synergize and work together, but that mix of 50-50 is thriving compared to the birdsfoot that's just kind of just getting started in the 100% plot. Here again is that 100% birdsfoot, it's just, the grass is just gone. And we just have spotty birdsfoot, not doing nearly as well as it is when it is sharing room with Timothy and annual ryegrass. This is something I just took a few days ago. This is our 2-year-old plot now, our mixed plot with 50-50 birdsfoot and Timothy, and our stinking ryegrass. And you can see easily, I'd say it averaged 12 inches tall. It was from 6 to 18, but I'd say probably the average was 12. And I've seen no bug pressure, no disease pressure, nothing. And it's just thriving, doing very well. I just want to show you. Okay, here's the area, the dotted line of that treatment where we have 50-50 here, 100% birdsfoot there, and you can still see no grass. We didn't apply a grass herbicide on that. It couldn't have been drift. Very close. I guess I don't have the slide in here that shows you a very clear demarcation here of very healthy grass and no grass. It wasn't flooding. It wasn't a flood effect. Don't know what happened. It is a concern because we should know what goes on that property. And that's a couple days ago in the 100% birdsfoot. It's okay, but the tallest it was 6 inches, and that was the minimum for the 50-50 plot. It's just not taking off. It probably will in this nice sunny hot weather here. Again, here's our 50-50 plot, and it's just going gangbusters. Very healthy, lots of tonnage. And here's the variety trial, where we have the 3 varieties. Very weedy. It's just a horrible plot. And it's only been mowed once. There are no, that's a real drawback, there are no herbicides registered for Birdsfoot Trefoil yet. We hope to be able to do some trials using one approved for alfalfa, but we may have to do some work to get that opportunity. But we've got the 3 varieties here, and you can see the emergence there. And looking across the field, the big picture, this area, you can see that nice green there, you can see this nice green, you can see that nice green. That's consistent with the wheat variety. It's doing the best of our 3 varieties. Terrible weeds, but good stands here, doing well. There's one of the varieties that's doing well, the wheat. It's embarrassing to show the weeds. And you know, I see a really well demarked area where that variety's doing well. And it was about 3 inches tall when I measured it. But here's the preliminary conclusions. I'd always heard that it had it was hard to establish, and I think from what we're seeing, I would call it slow emergence, but not necessarily hard to establish. I think if something could grow in that place that was underwater 2 years in a row, it's pretty impressive. Tolerant of wet soils, that's a real benefit over places that are too wet for alfalfa. We easily got 6 cuttings last year, and it's safe for direct grazing. It's a nice flexible crop. You could put it up as either graze it early or late, make haylage out of it, or bale it when it got dry in the summer. I have to say, though, that we had production throughout those dry summer months. We still cut every month. Very palatable. The animals ate it very well when it was fresh. I don't know the seed cost. I didn't find that in the websites. I brought a handout from one of the seed source companies, Allied Seed, and they say on there the stand duration is short. But Chuck, do you want to add a few comments now about?
I think it's persisted for decades in a lot of our county. I mean, it was planted, it was introduced by the Soil Conservation Service, as I understand it, after World War II. And you go west of the freeway or out on the South Fork, and it's very persistent in all those wet fields and the ditches. And here's the one thing, I don't know whether this, and people refer to it by its scientific name, which is different, but it's Lotus major, but there's a Lotus minor too, I guess. I don't know, maybe we've got But it is, you know, and all of the farmers that I've ever talked to that hay a lot of those areas, they all say that the animals, I mean, it's the one, I mean, because these fields are full of horsetail and buttercup and meadow foxtail, you know, all of these less palatable
Mhm.
and even toxic plants.
Mhm.
But they really say they really like the.
It's funny, it's persisted then.
Yeah, but it is extremely persistent.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Maybe we
yeah.
have just the right soils and climate for them. It's
Yeah.
apparently, that handout says it doesn't heave as well, as much as alfalfa, and it's much more tolerant of wet feet than alfalfa is. And as I mentioned, we only had 3 known varieties and then a mystery variety, but the wit is definitely showing better performance so far. And I think it holds promise as an option for some high-quality forage over here in Western Washington, maybe helping a little more forage independence. We're having an open house at the center on July 7th, and you're welcome to come. You could see these, you could tour these stands. Or if you want to come down another time, just give me a call and be happy to walk you out there with you. I think that was the last one.